we lost everything, and so it was a really tough time for me from a kind of a personal and spiritual standpoint. It really made it clear to me how much I needed God in my life. My only security can be found in my relationship with Jesus. That's really the only truly secure thing that there is in this world.
This week on the Jesus Calling video podcast, we're joined by Mike Nawrocki, co-creator of the beloved children's series VeggieTales, and the voice of Larry the Cucumber. Mike recounts the leap of faith he took with college friend and VeggieTales co-creator Phil Vischer, the setbacks and devastating losses they encountered while creating what would become an iconic staple for families everywhere, and how simple stories told by talking vegetables helped people understand God's profound love for us all.
My name is Mike Nawrocki. Most folks may know me better as the voice of Larry the Cucumber. I'm the co-creator of VeggieTales, the creator of the new Dead Sea Squirrels book and animated series, and also a professor at Lipscomb University. I grew up in a military family. I am an Air Force brat, born in Ohio, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, home of the Wright brothers and the birth of flight. And my dad was career Air Force, and we moved around, every 3 or 4 years, like most military families. And so got to, see a lot of the country, a lot of the world. Lived in Japan for 4 years, Southern California, Colorado, Washington, D.C. We started to go to this little church that his commanding officer recommended to him in Franconia, Virginia, little Christian and Missionary Alliance church. And just fell in love with a youth group there. So that was a time in my life when it really started to come alive with, wow, I just love entertaining people. I love music. I love singing. I love writing, but all as a hobby. They were all hobbies to me. I didn't know that that's what one could do for a living, much less a ministry, until later. I went to college. That's sort of what I pursued. And so my thought was, well, I would go to this denominational college of the CMA for a year or two, get some Bible classes out of the way. They didn't have a pre-med program there, and then transfer to a place with a pre-med program. So that's what I did. I went to Crown College, and every student was required to do a student ministry. And I had done some puppetry, growing up. Was a big Jim Henson fan, and plus, everybody knows that puppets are chick magnets. Who could resist? So went out for the puppet team, and lo and behold, met a guy named Phil Vischer, who would later become the voice of Bob the Tomato. And we just started writing and performing, and we like to say roaming around the Minnesota countryside, scaring the Baptists with our puppets. And just we shared a similar sense of humor, just had a really great time. He wanted to go to film school. I wanted to go to medical school eventually. And they didn't have a film program at this college either. So we were very aligned in terms of, okay, we're only going to go there for about a year or two. We both ended up there 3 semesters, a year and a half. I went back to Colorado, where I was from. He went back to Chicago, where he was from, to regroup. And then we're going to move out to California to be roommates, him to go to film school, me to go to pre-med. And he ended up landing a job. He did an internship. They offered him a job in Chicago, and he took that. And so all of a sudden I was roommateless, in my quest to go out to California. I'd gotten into a couple schools out there already, but I felt like, okay, I don't want to go out there by myself. There's plenty of places to do pre-med in Chicago. I packed up everything that I owned in my 1980 red Ford Fiesta and drove out to Chicago. And so just started working odd jobs. I wanted to get residency in Illinois to afford tuition at the University of Illinois, Chicago, which is where I ended up going. I then ended up landing a job that came open at Phil's, the post house that Phil was working at, as a graveyard shift VHS tape duplicator. So I would just, on the night shift, I would hit record on a 2-hour VHS cassette, and then, stop and, so I had a lot of time in between to sort of, start to read manuals. And I was kind of a techie computer guy, and Phil and I were having so much fun creating. And we felt like with all of this new technology emerging, particularly computer animation, which was just coming out, we felt like if we could create characters, really simple characters to tell stories, kind of like what we did with puppets, that there could be a big need for that. And so we also, along the way, did a promo for, what would become VeggieTales. Meanwhile, I graduated. I applied with the Peace Corps. I got in with the Peace Corps. And the same month, found out we've got funding for the first show. So I was going to go to Africa for 2 years and teach biology and then come back and go to medical school. That was the big plan. But, this was a point in my life now that's okay, here's a big decision. And I knew at that moment the decision that I made would really affect the rest of my life. It was clear as a bell to me. It's like, okay, I ship out, go to Africa, or I stay here and work on VeggieTales. And that was the big moment for me where I needed to pray about it and ask the people in my life who knew me best about what I should do. And so just seeking counsel like that. And I came to the conclusion that, these are people told me they felt like I had a gift for this. And, here was a great opportunity. And so, so I turned down Peace Corps and we got to work on Where's God and I'm Scared, which is our very first episode of VeggieTales. VeggieTales was the very first animated series, computer animated series to come out. We sold the show by taking out ads in Christian parenting magazines, to advertise these VHS tapes. And so we got about 500 orders and sent those out. Obviously, I think we raised about $60,000 to make the first show. 500 orders at $15 a pop. If you do the math, it doesn't come out to $60,000. It comes out to quite less. But one of the orders came from Word Records. Word was launching a new kids label called Everland Entertainment. By February of the next year, we signed a distribution deal with Word. And so we would get advances on distribution and make the shows. I remember when we finished the first show, it was such a Herculean effort to get it out the door and get it to people in the mail by Christmas. We almost all died doing it because it was just so much work, so many technical things to jump over. But, when seeing that we had completed a half an hour of computer animation was like, wow, we did it, And so when we started to hear stories from, about, college students having, VeggieTales dorm watching parties and all that, that's when it's like, oh, okay, well, maybe there's something going on here. And it was sort of spreading around by word of mouth. But then, by, so 93 through 95, 96, those were all very lean years. But by 97, it really started to catch on. And so, where, I was able to, I forget when it was in there, but I was able to stop doing freelance and, come over to, full-time VeggieTales. We never knew that, obviously it would get as big as it did. And even with the silly songs, I mean, it helped kids fall in love with Larry and the other characters. To the point where, they're just singing a silly song, but they love this character, they trust this character, and they care what the character has to say about God making them special and loving them very much. And so I think all of those things, it's just an incredible to see how God used that in ways that we could have never imagined before. And so, VeggieTales was getting big. We launched another series called 321 Penguins that was also doing well. And I remember I had started to write Jonah as a direct-to-video episode, and I was working on it, and I took it to Phil, and it was already getting really long, too long for a direct-to-video episode. And at that point, we made the decision, well, maybe this should be our first feature film. And so when the movie came out, it did well, but it didn't do as well as it needed to. We had all this money flowing out to finance the film, to launch 321 Penguins. We were also in a distribution lawsuit. It was a lawsuit that was later overturned, but we lost that lawsuit initially. And so all of those things came together to put us in bankruptcy, basically. And so, Phil and I, Phil was the majority owner of the company, but I owned a sizable chunk as well. We lost everything, and in danger of, and not just the stock, but, all, could have lost our houses and, all that sort of thing. So it was a really tough time, for me, from a kind of a personal and spiritual standpoint. It really made it clear to me how much I needed God in my life. I was just saddened by the loss of the community of people, because people were really excited to work on the show. And when we had to do that big round of layoffs, it was just heartbreaking to see, people who it was very missional for them. They were doing great work. It was reaching people, and yet, the economics of it just led to that, so that was it was heartbreaking more than anything else for me. At that point, it's like my only security can be found in my relationship with Jesus. That's really the only truly secure thing that there is in this world. And so that was a very clear lesson for me at that time. And God was really gracious and good to me and my family. And we went through that bankruptcy, but we were bought out of bankruptcy by a company who wanted to see us continue to do what we did. And so we ended up moving to Nashville. So we did that, and I was able to rebuild my life and continue doing a very similar thing to what I did pre-bankruptcy. And so I continued to do that for a number of years until 2016, and we were able to raise our kids and just continue to make shows, and it was a great thing. So I, for many years, was trying to think of, okay, what would it be like to come up with a show idea, to be able to tell more New Testament stories, more gospel stories in a way that is really fun and relevant for kids of today. And so, the general concept was Encino Man meets the Dead Sea Squirrels. So what if you brought two characters from the first century into the modern day, and then the bad pun, Dead Sea Scrolls, obviously was right there, and it ended up getting a 6-book deal out of it. And the 6-book deal turned into a 12-book deal as the book started doing well. In the meantime, I had coffee with my good friend Steve Taylor, whom I had worked with. We'd worked with on a couple of VeggieTales movies with Pirates, and then also Jonah. He had written a couple songs for those. Steve was a filmmaker in his own right, and he had started a film school at Lipscomb University. Steve asked me if I had ever considered teaching, and I was a little unsure of how to do that. But he said, tell you what, why don't you come over? You can be our artist in residence and actually go through our MFA program in film as well. And so graduated 2019. Sometimes my students call me Dr. Nawrocki. I'm not a doctor, but so teaching over there, writing the books, and then Steve and I just started to think, well, what would it look like to create a pilot, for the first book, and could we get the money for that? So Steve was actually able to raise some money for a pilot that we produced using the school partially as a production unit. And that ended up being a perfect thing to carve out for a student animation team to do. And then we partnered with an animation studio out of New Zealand to do the rest of the show. It's really neat to see kind of everything coming together, and really the heart of the show. My wanting to do this in the first place was to share more of the gospel story and share the gospel message with kids, and that's what we've been able to do. I run into young adults all the time now who the line that I'll get from them was, VeggieTales was my childhood, which is just such a powerful thing to hear, that the stories that we told, affected them so much that it's become so much part of how they grew up, which is just really humbling to see that. My dad was an avid reader of the Oswald Chamber, Utmost for His Highest. That's the one I've kept around, that's been on my nightstand for a long time. But I do feel like, and obviously Jesus Calling has had a tremendous reach. And I just, I think it's really important to have those resources, those reflections to, you're not leaving it all up to yourself to, you just get that challenge from another godly person to say, hey, have you thought about this? Can you reflect on this? And, as that relates to God's word, I think it's a beautiful thing.